Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Welcome back to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. Wednesdays, during the Noon Report, we tackle the tough topics facing today's families with licensed mental health counselor Christopher Anderson. And Chris, today we're talking about the family structure and what we're seeing today in society.
Yeah, Brandon, we are, and this is such an important topic. The social currents that we're seeing in society today are definitely moving us in a direction, as we all know, that is against the definition of what God lays out as His design for the family in His Word, the Bible. So with that in mind, we want to make sure that the truth and the basis for our discussion today will be based on what we see in the Bible for being the family structure.
Christians might be wondering how we go about clarifying what you mean by God's definition.
Sure. We're talking about the nuclear family with the father, mother, and the children. But it's very important right now that right off the bat we really clarify that our discussion is not meant in any way to cast aspersion on single-parent households. But with the increasing assault on the nuclear family definition, and especially the assault on God's design for families, that's what we need to address today.
So let's start with those trends that you mentioned that we're seeing in society.
We're seeing a redefining of what a family could and should look like based on society norms, and that's including same-gender unions where children are adopted by two mothers or two fathers. And the basis for this argument is that it's someone's civil right to be able to be a parent regardless of what people report to be their sexual orientation. So the reality is that this is not a civil rights issue if we are really going to be talking about the biblical design for parenthood and familyhood. It should not even be considered a civil right by anyone that considers themselves heterosexual, but rather a divine calling by God. So marriage and parenthood shouldn't be something that you claim and pursue just because you want it. If that were the case, then those who may not marry will always feel that they've been denied their own rights. Okay, that's just not the case. We know that God uses singles in mighty ways. I was single for years myself, not being married until I was in my 40s. But we're seeing the political movement of today that wants to tack onto the Civil Rights Act gender identity and expression, and this is to include marriage, adoption of children, and other benefits. So this movement has risen in response, in large part, to the persecution that these people have experienced for generations, and unfortunately, often at the hands of interactions with Christians. So, of course, I'm in no way attempting to justify the mistreatment of anyone, regardless of their beliefs about themselves or what they believe they're entitled to. And Christians should really take the lead in loving people, but this doesn't include necessarily supporting or celebrating lifestyles that go against what God says is His design. So we're simply focusing on what God's design is for the family, and in an ideal situation, of course, it's a mother, father, and the children in the context of a marriage. So sociologists who hold on to the biblical and traditional definition of families and marriages report that the greatest challenges facing our families today, particularly in inner-city locations, is that breakdown of the family structure and, of course, the absence of godly fathers in the household.
What advice do you have for people who just aren't sure how to navigate these waters?
One thing to keep in mind, and we all know this, is that there's this militancy today in the movement that we're seeing. You know, anyone that wants to hold the biblical view of marriage and the family unit and wants to speak up will likely encounter at least some level of resistance. And we're seeing this a lot, actually. But the church does need to take a stand, and Christians who believe the Bible to actually be the Word of God will need to be willing to speak out in a loving way. But working with your church leadership to understand where your church stands on the issue is an important first step. Secondly, have trusted friends, and this is that all-important support network that we've talked about many times. You need to have friends in that network that share your faith and also that share your beliefs so that you can communicate with them, asking them for support and prayer if and when you encounter challenges by others that don't share your beliefs. Don't walk this road alone, seriously. Make sure you speak the truth in love, especially when someone who believes the societal trends tries to get you to feel bad for holding a biblical view. So it's not, of course, a comfortable situation to be in. And thirdly, check for resources online that will help inform you of the trends, but also what you can do to support the efforts of organizations dedicated to God's design to the family. So, for example, Focus on the Family, the Family Research Council are two sources, among others, that will have resources for you. And then lastly, this one is really important, especially if you have small children, or really I should say even teens in schools. Make sure you're aware of what curriculums are being used to teach about topics such as sexuality and gender. There's a big push these days to get sexuality and gender taught in the earliest years of grade school. So as a parent, you have the right to know, and you are your child's main authority on these topics, not the school. So keep a close eye on what they're being taught, and you, as a parent, you take the lead on educating them on these topics.
You've been listening to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. It airs Wednesdays during the Noon Report. We tackle the tough topics facing today's families with Christian counselor Christopher Anderson.